The population of Africa is projected to be over 4.2 billion by the end of the century, with 40% of the world's population at the end of the century being African. So, what does this mean for the economies of Africa and the rest of the world? The early 20th century was considered the period of rapid growth for the Western world. The late 20th century was considered the period of rapid growth for the Asian world. And now, in the early 21st century, we're about to enter a period of rapid growth for the African world. And this is going to be a fairly predictable, but even more dramatic growth period than what we saw in the previous two eras. The most predictable area of need for Africa over the next century is going to be residential real estate. And anyone who is going to be able to consistently develop quality properties in Africa is going to be greatly rewarded. There's already a shortage of quality houses in Africa, so any developer that can come through, create good infrastructure, is going to find their developments sold out almost overnight. So if you're looking for a predictable way to generate wealth and provide value to Africa, developing residential real estate is probably the first way to go. Businesses also need to be aware that there's a second population boom happening in Africa, and that's the explosive growth of the educated African population. The number of college-educated Africans in the last century was under 5%. Recently, it's approached 10%. By the end of this century, it's going to be at or above 25% of the population. 25% of 4.2 billion means that there's going to be over 1 billion college-educated Africans on the continent. That means that any business that you have based out of Africa, which relies on individuals with a higher education, is going to have an ample supply of workers. And this ample supply of college-educated workers in Africa means that it's going to be easier for Africa to make use of the natural resources that it has available. We've seen this in Ghana and Ivory Coast with their recent moves with cocoa. We've seen Nigeria and Zimbabwe greatly restrict the export of lithium because they wanted to add value domestically. As more and more engineers are trained in Africa, the African economies are going to be able to generate wealth, add value, and grow their middle class, whereas when they were just simply extracting resources, there was only a few people who benefited. So as the middle class in Africa continues to develop, look to customer service and high quality as your keys to gaining market share. Also, don't discount things like insurance and retirement accounts, as more and more Africans have higher savings rates and start to want to look more towards retirement and long-term wealth building. Being on the ground floor of these industries as they develop can really be a good choice going into the 21st century. Of course, the growth of Africa is not guaranteed, and there are risks along the way. The first risk is exploitive developmental loans. So if you follow this channel, you know what I'm talking about. What will happen is that a certain organization will offer loans to the leader of a country for infrastructure projects. The return on investment will be greatly overstated, and the interest rates will fluctuate and eventually be raised in order to bankrupt the country and force them to submit themselves to Western powers. I believe, though, that the African leaders are getting wise and privy to these tactics, and they won't work as well in the 21st century. The next risk is just going to be general political instability. However, I think much of the political instability was caused by Western influence, and again, as the African countries become more wise to the tactics that are used by certain special interests in the West, the political stability is going to increase going into the 21st century, not decrease. The supply of housing is also a concern. Africa is already facing a shortage of quality housing, and as the population grows, there's going to be a lot more pressure on African countries to develop residential real estate if they want their economies to grow. There's also concerns over whether or not Africa is going to be able to get enough capital and heavy equipment into their countries in order to properly develop. This comes down to the Dr. Robert Solow models of economics. And lastly, there's concerns about whether or not automation and artificial intelligence is going to render large populations obsolete. Why do you need billions of people if a machine can do the work for you? However, Africa's trick up their sleeve is that they have the most natural resources, and artificial intelligence can actually be something that levels the economic playing field for Africa going forward. But I want to know what you guys think. Are you bullish on Africa going forward, or do you think that the risks outweigh the benefits? Let me know in the comments below. And if this video has provided value for you, give me a like or a follow. That really helps out my channel. I really look forward to hearing your comments, and I'll see you guys on the next video.